Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining our second office hours, Near Media office hours. This is normally for paying subscribers, but we open this one up to the whole audience because we have a very special guest in Brad Wetherall, who is the former director of Google Business Profile Support. Howdy, Brad. And he's now the founder of Bitwise Consulting, his own SEO and digital marketing consulting firm. You want to say anything, Brad?
Yeah,
That's your cue. That's
sorry,
your cue to say hi and say whatever you'd like to say about yourself.
Yeah, no worries.
Why don't you more fully introduce yourself than I did?
No problem. No, thanks, Greg, for having me. So as you mentioned, I'm the former director of operations for Google. I spent over a decade at Google, worked on many Google products while I was there. The longest tenure and my greatest expertise was in the Google Business Profile, or GMB, Google My Business, as it was referred to back in the day. I started working on Google My Business in 2013, all the way up until last year. A couple of additional products that I have expertise in. My first product at Google was Google Wallet. So I managed the payments team for a while. And then towards the end of my tenure at Google, my responsibilities expanded, and I was also responsible for the Google Merchant Center, which is part of the shopping suite of products, as well as Google Domains, which was Google as a registrar, up until the point that domains were sold to Squarespace, at which point then I helped manage the migration over to Squarespace. But yeah, by far and away, my longest tenure and my greatest expertise was the Google Business Profile team. Spent over a decade working on it, working on a number of different areas, which I'm sure you all are familiar with. So happy to talk to you about various features and evolutions and things, based on my tenure there.
We can have a limited number of people in the studio. It's nice to have some other people here to ask questions live. Everybody else will be able to ask questions through the live stream, so please tee up your questions. You can submit them at any time, and we'll get to them as we get to them. I also want to say just real quickly, encourage people to sign up for our paid subscription. It's how we're supporting ourselves right now. And so all you free people that are enjoying our content, please consider $20 a month, and we have bulk discounts for multiple people in your organization. We also want to thank our podcast sponsor, the transparency company, askfortransparency.com. They are policing fake reviews and giving people insight into review authenticity. Recent report on review fraud and the economic impact of that's available on their site. It's a very interesting report. And so with that, I will turn it back over to Mike Blumenthal to ask his question.
So before I do, in terms of Claudia and Ehab, they're here because they are product experts in Google Business Profiles. Both, I think, Ehab, you're silver, and Claudia, you're diamond or some level. They're both very knowledgeable in Google Business Profiles. Has done along with me, a lot of free labor on Google's behalf, and staff the forums. And they each have their own specialties in that area within that. And so I just welcome them because they bring the perspective of the people who are on the front lines to this. So the question I had to ask of Brad, that's sort of a large question about your tenure. My impression is that Google encourages employees to move departments on a regular basis. And it strikes me that sometimes institutional knowledge is lost in that transfer. And we've seen institutional knowledge in local have to be recreated time and time again, where we see the same problems crop up. And I'm wondering if these recurrent problems are related to this process of encouraging transfers.
Yes and no. I think I say that a lot for you, Mike, I guess. But yeah. So like, what I mean by that is, first, I would challenge the Google is actively pushing movement and changing roles. I think that the way that I would phrase it is that Google really wants to retain talent. And so instead of losing people to outside entities, if someone in a role is ready for a change, whether that be up leveling in their career or just going into a different domain, they encourage internal mobility. And so if you're ready for a management role, but there doesn't have to be a management role, that there's no availability for that role on your team, they will encourage you to try and move to a management role in another part of the organization as opposed to going outside of Google. So it's a slight tweak on the encouragement of mobility, because they're not trying to force people to move around, but they are trying to embrace and curate talent. That being said, you are correct. Because of that, there is a lot of internal mobility, and people do move around. And I think that there is a lot of domain expertise, I think, that sometimes gets moved around, and different perspectives from different leaders, especially, can influence the direction of where the company is going. So there is a little bit of truth to what you said about, like, can that explain some of the shifts in strategy? Absolutely. But I think I would argue that's normal for many large companies.
Hey, let me ask a question on the heels of that. What does Google do about preserving or passing on knowledge of the specific domain, institutional knowledge, as Mike referred to it, internally?
Yeah, well, I mean, like, it's probably not a surprise that documentation is pretty heavy at Google. There's a pretty good knowledge sharing source internally, but an extension of that is, even though the information is available, doesn't always necessarily mean it's being looked at or followed. The other benefit is that, because a lot of these people that are moving around are still part of the family, still part of Google, you can always call them up and ask them. Most of the time, however, I've found that doesn't happen as frequently as you might think, because usually the goal of the organization is forward-looking, not backwards-looking. And so, like, a lot of the time it's about getting new insights, new information, collecting data within the current usage of the product in a way to influence the forward direction of a product. So there isn't really a huge need to kind of like maintain that tribal knowledge, because a lot of it is going forward. That being said, I'm probably, I spent my entire Google career in the same organization at Google. It was an organization called Google Technical Services, or GTech is what it's called internally. And that's fairly unique for Google to spend over a decade in the same team. And I found that being tremendously valuable, because I was able to tell the stories of, like, why did Google turn on the websites feature, right? Like, and then why did they turn it off, right? And I have all that history, and I can explain kind of like the evolution as we go. So there's definitely some good history and knowledge that I share, but how that influences the forward strategy is actually quite minimal, because a lot of the times the PMs and engineers are looking at current data and current trends and what's happening in the market in order to influence those decisions.
Should we go to our panelist questions, Mike? Do you think?
Let's talk about what's happening in the market right now. Obviously, the review disappearance and count discrepancy bug has been a very hot topic in local over the last couple of weeks. I mean, I think just turn the floor over to you. Do you have any thoughts on what's going on, and can you shed any light for our audience on how you think Google might be approaching the solution?
Yeah, well, I mean, without having visibility behind the scenes, it's hard to know exactly what happened. My guess...
We want you to speculate.
Yeah, here it comes. Here comes the speculation. So my guess is that they tweaked the review algorithm that is detecting... because I think I've mentioned this on prior podcasts and talks, where Google's approach to attacking or preventing spam is to have this trust algorithm that has a gauge that says, do we believe this is violating our policies? Do we believe that it is okay? And it's not a binary thing. It's a statistical representation. And so what the trust and safety team often do is they dial that thing up and down to account for what's happening in the market. And if they see an influx of spammy behavior, which usually to them results in how many takedowns they're seeing, right? And it's like, or they do an audit and they're like, hey, we're getting a lot of reports that there is spammy behavior that isn't being taken down. So they dial it up a little bit. Now, the problem with that is that if they dial it up too much, then yes, it's effective at getting rid of the fake and bad content, but it also increases the amount of collateral damage. So like good posts, good listings in the case of suspensions get caught in the net, and then as a result, the support dies down on the, hey, there's a bunch of fake reviews, but it increases on the, hey, you've gotten rid of all of the like good, honest, hardworking people that are working really hard to get their 5-star reviews, and they're all disappeared. My educated guess is that they were playing with the dial, right, and they probably dialed it up too much. They probably quickly identified that it resulted in a bunch of legitimate reviews getting removed and put them all back, right? Or at least a good percentage of them they put back. We as experts may not have seen that happen because it might have happened very quickly. What ends up happening, however, is the count lags the change in the review automation. So like what probably happened is that the index of the review count was getting updated and it was reflecting an incorrect count based on something that they had done previously. And so when a lot of our users were going in and saying like, my reviews are gone, but then, if they happen to go in, I mean, it's easy to know if you had 10 reviews and then you got 5, you can go look at the reviews and you're like, hey, all 10 of them are there. That's a little bit harder to do if you have 3,000 reviews, obviously, because you're not going to go through and count them all. But like, that was one of the symptoms that we saw, is that the reviews are actually still there. It's just the numerical value is misrepresenting that. And that is a different part of the system that needed to get fixed. And so, my guess is that they played with the dial. It got rid of a lot of legitimate listings. They went, whoops, let's put it all back, right? They probably corrected automatically. But then the symptom of people thinking that their reviews were gone is what spiked our support channels. And my guess is that thousands of businesses were reaching out saying, like, my reviews are missing, which, given the order of magnitude of that change across the world, prompted them to actually write an official response, which I don't know if you saw that, but if you go to the support website, you saw Victoria. One of my old employees actually ended up writing the forum post acknowledging that this is a known issue and that the engineers are going to fix it, and it'll update over time.
I have a quick follow-up comment and then a question. The comment is every business should be tracking their Google reviews, full text, username off of Google, whether it's through your software management or your copy and paste. For whatever reason, Google has trouble recovering them. If they do take them down, they are legitimate. You need to sort of spoon feed them the data. The second is, my understanding is it's not only in a second index, the review count, but it's in what's called a lazy index. Is that understanding correct? In other words, it doesn't get updated as frequently as perhaps the review content itself. And if there's a processing issue, it may get delayed. But because of the size of this, it got delayed a little bit longer because as it works through. Is that a correct understanding?
I don't know. Truthfully speaking, my guess is that sounds right. It definitely would explain the symptom that we're seeing, where it's not a direct translation of the number of reviews to the count. So it is clearly being referenced somewhere else. There's some type of data aggregation of the reviews that is missing. I'm a little surprised that it's taken them so long to fix. That seems like rebuilding the index would be a pretty easy thing to do. So I'm not fully aware of the inherent complications of fixing that. The timing of it makes it mean maybe there's a little bit more going on than we understand, but I wasn't part of the engineering team to be able to say definitively.
Well, it keeps consultants in business.
I want to go to our in-studio guests in a minute, but here's a question that's really directly relevant. So Kurt is asking, does it suggest that this dialing up and dialing down that you referred to, Brad, is applied to all languages and regions at the same time? Is that a global change that happens simultaneously?
That's a good question. Again, I can't say definitively because I wasn't part of the engineering team, But my guess is yes. My guess is that the algorithms behind the scenes are looking at a corpus of data and doing sanity checks, and they're likely using the translation algorithms to kind of make sure that it's being applied equally. That would be my guess. It would shock me if they had different algorithms for different markets or different countries. They may have different rules for different markets, right, just based on local regulations and things like that. But I would be shocked if they were duplicating the engineering effort to create the underlying rules that are applied to the algorithm itself.
Okay, so Ehab, why don't we go to you? The questions are starting to come in, but let's go to you. And you had a couple of questions, one of which was related to the reviews incident, and then you had a second question.
It was mainly around sort of the comms around around the mishap. I think, for someone who used to work in support, one of the first things I learned was almost doesn't matter how long it takes to fix an issue. You're absolutely right, Brad. It took a very long time, and it almost seemed that they tried to fix it on Monday, and it almost got worse for a sec before it got better. But actually, the comms is more important, in my opinion. Having just regular expectations set, and it seemed like someone had pushed a release late in the week, which again goes against general principles that I've seen in my career. At least usually Tuesday, Wednesday is a perfect time to push a release. Someone's released something really, really late, and it's messed up, and then everyone's gone away for the weekend, or most people who are communicating from Google has gone away from the weekend, and most businesses have gone, what's going on? When is Google going to answer this? We're losing customers, etc. Because most of the people thought they lost reviews, didn't they? And it was actually a counter. But then also on the side of that, I found it really interesting that the index or the counter itself is there's two different places. So for hotels, you see the review, star rating, and the count on the name, on the map pin, on the map. As well as you seeing it, obviously, if you open up a listing in Google Maps or on Google Search on the knowledge panel. But I saw that would differ. And that happened all over the world, whether it was in Japan, whether it was in London, wherever it might be. And I saw 3,000 reviews on the map, 2,000 reviews on the listing. And I thought that was really, really interesting. So it's kind of a twofold question here, what are your thoughts on the comms, and also what are your thoughts on having two different indexes and literally on the same screen? So, yeah.
Yeah, cool. All right. So first question on the comms is I've always had the opinion during my time at Google that Google isn't doing enough communication, proactive communication. And I suppose that's not surprising given the role that I had in the organization, right? Because I was leading the support and the operations team. And so a big part of my motivation was to explain what's happening to prevent calls, right? Prevent cases coming in. And if I had the ability to more effectively communicate, then my hypothesis was that I would reduce the amount of people calling me and getting it wrong. And so this was a constant battle that I had fought with policy and different teams internally. I think that the philosophy is really around so in this particular case, especially when it's a Google issue, where Google actually caused the problem, it's very uncommon for them to kind of come out and say, sorry guys, we screwed up, right? They're not going to do that.
Uncommon? Has it ever happened?
Yeah, but I'm trying to be polite, right? So, but in a case like this, my guess is what happened is that when we're looking at the statistics of support cases coming in the front door, right, it spiked, right? And it's oh my God, we're got an order of magnitude larger of missing review cases coming through in the last week. What's the problem? And my guess is that those weren't slowing down and were likely resulting in a backlog. So those people that have actually created a case out to Google support saying hey, I'm missing my reviews, have probably gone a week with no response, or at least depending on how long they replied it. And that's because there's probably a significant number. I mean, just in full context, in 2023, the last full year that I worked at Google, we supported over 3 million contacts, right? And so it just took a tremendous amount of volume to remediate those issues. And so my guess is that they're working their way through the backlog, but it's taking time. And if we weren't seeing, so internally we kind of approach things from two capacities, right? The first one is, how do we stop the bleeding? And two, how do we solve the problem, right? And so my guess is that the communication strategy was, we need to stop the bleeding. We need to stop people from calling us, and we need to explain to them that the reviews aren't gone. We're just reporting them incorrectly, right? And that we will get around to fixing it. But, in a polite way, they're saying, stop creating tickets for us, because like we know this is a problem. The increase of the volume is making it harder for us to get on top of. We'll get there, right? And so once they stop, so that I believe is what the motivating factor was in sending out a communication on it. And why I think this particular example is unique in that sense, because it was kind of like, it was a pretty dramatic spike. Most of the time, you're not going to see it. You're not going to see a direct communication, especially when it's Google's fault. But in many cases, that's just the way they play. That's just the name of the game. The second part of your question. Sorry, go ahead, Greg.
No, I just want to be mindful of the time. Go ahead, Brad.
Yeah, so the second part of your question was, correct me if I'm wrong, it was around... Actually, what was the second part of your question? Just so I make sure I understand.
It was about the choice of having an index being used for like in two different places on the same screen. As a UI perspective, that is very, very confusing.
Yeah, so that, you used hotels as an example. And I think that is, hotels have their own UX for the GBP. It's not a consistent UX. They actually is owned by the hotel team. So that's kind of the story behind why the experience for hotels is different from the experience for every other client or every other type of business. And so it's by design, because I think the hotel team have very specific requirements in terms of, like, the star rating can be confused with, there is a star rating of the hotel and then there is the star rating of the listing, right? And so like the star rating of the hotel is like an independent research done on the ratings of that particular hotel that shows up on like Expedia and things like that, right? There's an official star rating. And so they needed to figure out a way to have these star ratings coexist. And so that is kind of the main reason why they're slightly different, but they shouldn't be different for any other industry. So like maybe we can follow up offline on that, but if I didn't answer your question, but in the interest of time, that explains why there is maybe a little bit confusion depending on the industry.
So real quickly, Ehab, your first question on the trust score.
I'll actually, so the it kind of is a follow-up on sort of this whole black box element of comms, really, which is, we all know that like Google doesn't really communicate a lot of things, whether it's the well-known ranking factors or the comms here or whatever it might be. So it's really sort of about the trust score, really, and as a local guide, how that influences the trust score in terms of how it influences edits. And if someone is like a level 10 local guide versus someone who's not a local guide, obviously versus someone who's been spamming quite a lot. But specifically those higher levels, how does that impact? And is it wise to ask a small business to say, come and get a bunch of local guys to review your business and make a bunch of edits? That's really, really going to help you out.
That's an interesting hack you put there at the end. I mean, like the general perspective is that, yes, there's a lot like it's based on authority, right? Like authority is a word that gets thrown around a lot these days, both in the context of user authority. So like the trust score of a user. It gets used a lot in the context of AI, right? And like, hey, how do you influence getting your business into the AI overview, right? And authority comes up a lot. It's like if you're an authority on that piece of information, it increases your chances of getting in the AI overview. So the premise of your question is correct, is that the higher the trust, the more likely that Google will accept your edits or trust that if you're leaving a review and then someone comes along and says, this is spam, it's unlikely that will get pulled down if it has a trust threshold associated to it. So the short answer is yes. The problem with saying something like, you should just get a bunch of product experts to come in and review your business, is that if it's not a legitimate review, right, and you never actually use those services and you're just kind of like gaming the system because you know that they have a trust score, not only will they get removed, but they also impact your trust score. So your trust score drops as a result of that. So there's a negative incentive in trying to game the system. So I would be cautious with that type of strategy.
Yeah, it's a bit more in the intention of like having journalists come to review your restaurant after you've opened, that kind of thing. But
Yes.
instead having local guides because they have that level of authority.
So that is a great example, and yes, that is perfectly good to do, right? If you want to invite a journalist to your business for dinner, you want them to review you on. That's fair game. That's great. That's a legitimate use case for a review, and yeah, more power to you. That would be great.
Okay, Claudia, why don't you ask your question or questions plural? You're
Sorry,
unmuted.
I was muted.
Yeah.
Actually, I think now would be a good time for Vinay to talk about, that tip you shared with us where you're like, the review is not published, so go ahead, delete it, call the business, hit the driving directions and republish the review. He posted something about that on LinkedIn. And so when you guys were talking, it made me think about that. Maybe Vinay can elaborate more on it, but what's your take on that, Brad?
Did that work?
Yes, it works.
I mean, look, that's genius, actually. I mean, because it's he's just increasing the signals of trust, right? Like if you're using driving directions to get to a particular location, and Google has the ability to geocode you to that location, then it's more likely that it is a legitimate review. So yes is the short answer. It's interesting to hear how creative people are getting in order to kind of like add authority to their domains. That seems to me like it would be a legitimate way to do it, right? And because you're increasing the trust of a legitimate review. So that sounds good. Sounds like, yeah, I'm not surprised that it worked. That is a reasonable strategy.
So Vinay,
Greg, I have one more follow-up question, if I could.
Yeah, that's fine. But Vinay, why don't you just clarify what you did for the audience in case it wasn't clear to people?
Yeah, okay. So we generally search in general, not just the business name. And then when the business name comes up, we click call button and wait for some time, 20 seconds, 1 minute, and then post a review, and then that goes live. Sitting anywhere, we can review anywhere.
Smart.
Google would probably frown on that if they heard about it directly. But
well, here's the thing about that, Greg, is that it works so long as it isn't abused. And so as soon as if Google starts seeing like, hey, what is going on here? We saw this massive trend of people calling the business, leaving reviews, and they all turn out to be fake reviews, and we end up pulling them down anyway. They adjust their algorithm to figure out that gaming. And that's where they're constantly trying to figure out, just as you guys are trying to figure out how to get a step ahead, they're also trying to figure out a way to not allow people to abuse the system for methods than other intended. So maybe saying it on a podcast isn't the great way to continue to get away with that strategy, but I'll defer to you.
Okay, back to you, Claudia.
Okay, so I kind of want to change the subject to like spam listings. So you have a bunch of spam listings. I escalate in the forum. Some get removed, some don't. What is Google looking at when they decide if this listing's fake? Is it the reviews that are left on the account? Like if they have a bunch of local guys leaving reviews, does that mean that they're somewhat legitimate? Is it the Street View map? Because half the time the Street View map is off and reason enough for them to take it down. It's quite confusing.
Yeah, it is. And I share in your confusion sometimes, right? Because there's many times where I've had people contact me and say like, hey, like, this particular listing is clearly fake. It's a residential address. They're masquerading as a business. There's a lot of evidence to support the fact that it's not real. And I also have had challenges in pulling down fake listings. The answer to your question is there's a lot that goes into the assessment. It's lots of different signals that are being extracted from everywhere. So it's like domain authority is another one. So like the website and the quality of the website, the activity on the account, there's just so many factors that will play into it that it's hard to actually pinpoint and say, this is the one thing that you need to do in order for it to get down. I've also personally struggled with that in my new world as a GBP consultant. It's a challenge, and I think that even sometimes going through the redressal form and reporting things ends up with no response, and you just don't hear anything come of it. And so I do fear that there's not really a lot of attention being placed on this at the moment. And, I think that that's maybe a symptom some internal politics and some kind of like shifting of resources from one project to another, where I think that there hasn't been a huge amount of investment in fixing this problem. Usually when that type of thing happens at Google, it's time bound, right? So like Google will not solve a problem until it gets to almost a breaking point where it's like, oh my God, this is like incredibly broken. And then they go in and re-engineer it. But I speculate that we're in a phase right now where no one's looking at it and they don't care. And if the algorithm leaves it up, then they're just going with what the algorithm says and they're not really trying to invest to improve the algorithm. My prediction is that will last for a period of time until it gets out of hand. And then they're going to do a sweeping change. And we're going to probably even see some really, in some cases, detrimental impacts where they dial it up and then all of a sudden legitimate businesses get caught in the net, right? And so it's that same problem with reviews. There you go. So there was a fire engine or something in the background. But
that's because I had something to add to this conversation, and I'm sorry about the fire engine, but I'm going to add it anyways. My experience is you elevate, you escalate, you go through the redressal form, then bring it into the forum. We escalate in the forum, maybe 100 listings, all clearly related. Maybe they're calling the same call center and or have the same website. Like in Claudia's case, 20 come down, that leaves 80. What I do in those situations is I go back to the poster, ask for some additional piece of evidence so that I'm not presenting the same stuff again. I present that again. Another 40 will come down. So we're up to 60 out of the 100. Meanwhile, the business gets 5 or 10 of the original ones reinstated. So maybe we have 45 left. And I go back at it multiple times. Now, on the third time, they seem to take it more seriously. And subsequent requests are much more easily fulfilled. So the problem is I have to have a whole system to keep track of how many times I've contacted, re-escalated, added new information. So it's very, very time consuming to get them to the point where I think a human is actually looking at it and seeing the broad-based abuse.
Yep. My interpretation of that experience, Mike, is it's a resourcing issue. And the more you flag it up, the more likely it gets in front of someone who's actually.
I just want the resources' attention to focus on me. That's all.
You don't say.
Okay, so I want to move to some questions from the live stream audience. One about review replies. So reviews have started to come back, but replies have not come back yet. Is that going to happen, and if so, when?
Yeah. That's a great point. I think Mike mentioned earlier that the review itself is actually not owned by the business. The review is owned by the user leaving the review. And so what's interesting is that the reply to that review is actually owned by the business that's leaving the reply. So it's a little bit complicated in terms of, putting Humpty Dumpty back together again, in terms of all the pieces. My guess is that because this is an issue that has the attention of the engineering team because of the impact that it's had, is that they will proactively do that. I would give it some time before you start contacting support and being like, hey, thanks for returning my reviews, but my replies are missing. I'd give it a little bit of time.
I think this person doesn't want the replies to come back.
Oh, well, I don't know if you're going to have that option. You don't want
some of them are negative.
To come back?
Some of them are critical. Some of the reviews are critical.
Oh
no. I'm sorry. Maybe I'm misquoting it. No, never mind. Come in again. Go, keep going.
Yeah. So look, replies to reviews are important. I think
they're the businesses.
Yeah. I mean, like my mate at Michelle at GMB API, they did this study that showed for every 10% increase in replies to reviews results in a 3% increase in impressions. So there's data to reflect that replying to reviews does actually have an impact on impressions, on performance. So the short answer is yes, you do want to make sure that you're applying to reviews. And if they happen to have been deleted with this issue and they haven't come back, it is worth the effort to get them restored. My guess is that Google is going to restore them proactively, but if they don't, it would be worth the while to file a ticket and make sure that they get returned.
So, Brad, what's the source on that 3% impression boost?
It's the GMB API team. So if you go to gmbapi.com,
Okay, all right. So it's not internal data.
That is not internal data. No, that is a study
so
that the GMBAPI.com team did on their corpus of accounts, which is, I don't know if they're over hundreds of thousands, but they're definitely in the tens of thousands of businesses.
Okay. So
just for the audience, I would just qualify Brad's statement that it is unlikely that the content of the reply is having the impact. It is more likely the increasing engagement is having the impact. So correct. People don't need to be keyword stuffing their replies. That's not going to do any good. You need a really compelling answer so that the next searcher stays on the profile longer, would be my theory. I haven't I don't have any proof of that, but
no, Mike, I think you're spot on, right? It's the signal of engagement, and the idea is that if Google sees more activity from the business, it is more likely to believe that the data is accurate, and if the data is more accurate, it's more likely to show it in the higher up in results, because data integrity. There's a whole team at Google that just does data integrity. They just want to make sure that the data is accurate, and so the engagement signal is a good proxy for quality. So the more you engage with it, the better off it'll be.
So here's somebody who's asking about business verification with video and complaining about that it only works a very small percentage of the time. Do you have any recommendations on how to deal with that?
Sorry,
what person says it got business video verification. So the person's saying it's just getting more and more difficult to do this.
Yeah.
They say it's gotten to the point that I want to book a flight to California to try and get in front of someone to talk to. And the question really is do you have any recommendations about how to improve or expedite or smooth out the process?
I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, I think that I've consulted with a lot of companies where the reason it's not getting approved is because the recording that they did, the video that they didn't give the agent what they needed to approve it, right? And so like you got to make sure that you're following a very particular script, a very particular process. Like one example that came up the other day for me was they were showing documentation, right? Like, so one of the requirements is like, show me a utility bill or something that has the business name on it, the address, and so it can connect the business to the location with some type of official document. But when they put the phone over the image, it was blurry, and so the agent couldn't read it, right? And so if the agent can't read the document, then it can't approve it because it can't use that as evidence. And so that's an example of where sometimes the video verification will fail, not because you're doing something wrong, but because the quality of the recording is not where it needed to be.
There are two other external issues. When I was at the PE meeting in London and I asked the engineer about it and he claimed it was working perfectly, I said, well, what does perfect mean?
Yeah.
He said about 90% of the time is it technically able to accept the video. And so there's clearly a bandwidth issue on Google's end where they can only process so much information. If you're experiencing the inability to get the video through, try to do it during off hours. You also have to be really careful that the video is short to minimize the bandwidth on Google's side needed. If possible, keep it less than 2 minutes, which is very difficult if you've got to get up to the 74th floor and have a street view as well. But meanwhile, try to keep it under 2 minutes and try to do it off hours to overcome this working in air quotes 90% of the time, because you might, if you're calling like during the meat of the day, you might be running into that limit.
The one piece of advice that I would give you all, and this group probably knows about it already, is that if you've attempted video verification and it's failed, when you go through the support process, or at least the smart journey for verification, which is the troubleshooter, at the bottom of the page, if you go through that process the first time, there's a link at the bottom of the page that says send feedback, right? And it's a link that doesn't do anything and you should ignore it. But if you attempt video verification and you go back through that same flow, that link is changed to contact support, at which point it takes you to a dedicated form that allows you to do an offline manual verification where you can upload evidence instead of having it go through a video. That process is by design, the engineers were getting frustrated with the amount of support requests that we were getting for verification, that we as a support organization then were just routed over to a verification team, and they would do this manual verification offline. And their hypothesis was, we first want them to try video verification, and if video verification fails, then we'll allow them to do manual verification. And so that's the reason why, if that account and that listing, if you've never attempted video verification, it's going to send you to that send feedback link. But if you've at least attempted it, then there's a signal in the back end that says they've attempted video verification, it failed for whatever reason. You now get the option to do a manual verification where you can upload content. So
it's called the have mercy option that shows up only after a lot of frustration.
Yeah.
And I'll just add that it does take support 3 days to get back, so be patient.
It does, yes.
Okay, so question about duplicated auto-generated listings. So this person has a client that was verified, optimized, and then recently a duplicated listing showed up, incorrect business name with, I guess, the correct address. Why would this be, and it had a negative effect on the real listing. Why would this happen if there was a verified listing and this is the same business essentially, although the name was different? Why would that happen?
I think you just answered the question. The name was different.
Well, it said the business name was wrong. The business name was wrong. Now that's my.
Was it a Google update? Was it a Google update on the listing saying that we don't think your business name is this, we think it's that, or it's a legit duplicate listing?
I'd have to go back.
It's the latter. I mean, what ends up happening is, and you see this frequently with service area businesses that have their address at a trusted source for Google.
Yeah.
Google will see that the address is different than the service area business. They'll bring this listing in from the trusted source. And I have to say, they trust many sources more than they trust the business. You have to get that through your head. And so then there's two listings, one for the SAB and one for the addressed listing.
I see.
And you have to get in touch with the support to get that resolved because the automated system can't automatically merge them.
I see.
Now, normally listings get merged when there's enough distinction between the two. They don't, and you have to engage support.
Yeah.
But it's because there's some trusted source in Google's panoply of sources that is different than the source than what you've given them.
Yeah, that's probably right. And I think that because you're also right that Google gets its data sources from a lot of different places. There's publicly available content, so like usually a lot of government databases that Google has access to where they can extract information. But then they also license a lot of data as well. So they'll go out and they'll pay a company, an aggregator, to have access to their data to kind of like inject into the algorithm to make decisions. And so a lot of times, if they get the reporting of that a business exists, and of course this is in addition to like crawling the internet and things like that. But like, if they're getting evidence to support the fact that a business is there, they will create the business on the map in an unclaimed state. Right now, it sounds like that's what's happened in this case, is that Google legitimately thought it was a different business. They didn't think it was the same business. They thought it was different. Now, clearly they got that wrong. But because it's an algorithm, it's like it's never going to be perfect, And so it probably created that. And so the course of action is to submit a ticket to get those two merged. And that should be a fairly straightforward process.
Okay, question about hours. So there's a business that's a storage facility, allows 24/7 access to the physical units, but uses a virtual office with a call center that has hours to handle customer service. So you've got a call center with limited hours. You've got they're online, and you've got a physical locations that have 24/7 access. How do you manage the hours? It says not listing operating hours impacts ranking, but listing hours that don't represent someone being able to physically help you at the location can get flagged by Google.
My understanding is that the product was designed to support either scenario. Like the idea would be, like if you're McDonald's as an example, right, and you want to put a phone number.
So quick, let me interject something. There's a recent edition of online versus offline hours that's now available. So if you have some sort of, and I guess that's online telemedicine or counseling or whatever it is, that I don't know what it fully encompasses. But yeah. Is that the way to deal with it?
So there's two ways to answer that question. There's the is this against Google policy question, or is this a better idea from rank perspective, right? And I think those two, I have different answers for the different things. Like, so if we're playing the ranking game, I would argue do a local phone number for the local account. If we're playing the policy game, if you're a company that wants to have your phone number go through an 800 number that is a call center that's available 24/7, Google's not going to prevent you from doing that. That's fine, right? That's not a violation of policy.
Well, it's the opposite actually. The call center has limited hours. The physical location is 24/7. 24/7 will get you better rankings because you'll show up 24/7.
Yes.
The call center, the concern is about misrepresenting call center hours, or how do you handle the distinction?
That's weird. I mean, like, I would have thought that the scenario would have been the opposite, where a call center would have been 24 hours and local would have been.
It's the physical. It's local is 24/7.
I guess to answer your question is that you could do either. I don't know. That it's really up to you on a performance thing. Like, which do you want to do?
Well, I would, if you would default to
Just
the 24/7.
I have some storage clients, and they consistently get their 24 hours changed back to the call center hours by Google. It's an ongoing thing that consistently happens. So whether that's a policy issue or whether it's a data sourcing issue, I'm not sure, but they consistently get it changed back.
Interesting. So that's more of a Google update issue, right? Where Google is reverting back to a certain thing because it thinks it's an authority. Right, and then internally we used to call these things edit wars, where it would just ping pong back and forth forever. Ultimately.
Okay, so sorry.
No, go ahead.
Vinay, real quickly, your Indian versus U.S. support question.
Yeah. So I've been dealing in a lot of troubleshooting things, and I've always talked to Google support for any of my requirements or issues. So what I observe that when someone with the Indian name pops up, they fail to give me the knowledge which they have, or they fail to give me any solution. But when it comes to any person with the US name, so definitely they are from the US team, they are very knowledgeable and they clear my issues within 24 hours. So is there really a difference between them, the knowledge wise and the power wise?
No. I mean, a lot of the agents in India are using English names anyway, right? So like you'll get an email from Paul that is actually an agent sitting in India. There are a number of call centers. I think when I left, I think we had 9 different locations. The performance out of Athens, Greece, was actually probably the best, I think.
Is there any issue with third-party outsourcing that might be correlated with this?
Yeah, definitely. I think internally we looked at support agent performance by location and compared against each other, right? Which is why I was confident to say that the agents out of the Athens location was outperforming the team out of the Gregor.
What is their phone number?
It's the same phone number, mate. You don't get to choose. But also who was it? It was the Argentina location was probably the best yet, and I think they were the Spanish speaking, right, or Portuguese, or both. But so.
Yo hablo español.
Call support in a different language. Maybe you get a different experience.
Okay.
Be right back. I'm going to go learn Greek right away.
Yeah. Question about a paid support program. Has Google ever considered, or are they considering offering a paid support program, which there would clearly be demand for? You can say everything. You're not working there anymore. So the answer is yes, but when? When are they
So let me talk about what I can talk about, which is the Small Business Advisors Program. So this was the first investment into the concept of paid support. And what was interesting when we designed that. Are you familiar with the Small Business Advisors Program, first and foremost? So yes. For the viewers that aren't, it's actually a paid consultation service. If you go to business.google.com/advisors, I think it's is it $39.99 or $40? It's one of those. It's around that, and you pay for a 45-minute appointment, and you submit all of your evidence ahead of time, and the agent will research a case and come to that call with intelligent things to say about it. Now, the interesting thing about that is, and this is kind of coming back to your question, Greg, about paid support, is that we really didn't want to create the same thing that you get for free and the support for, but just have a price tag to it, right? So it would be dishonest. And so we wanted to figure out a way to differentiate between the support that you get for free and the support that you pay for. So if you call them up asking for resolving an issue, they're likely going to push back on you and say, oh, you can access the free support channel for that, right? Like you don't have to pay $40 for an hour for me to give you something that you can get for free. What that channel is more designed for, and we created it coming out of a lot of Grow with Google events and local U events and things like that, where we would have businesses come up to us and say, I don't know how to use your product. I will pay you to do it for me. And a lot of the time Google would say, no, you don't have to pay us. It's free, right? Like just go here and do it. And the users would say, I can't figure it out. I'm not tech savvy enough to know how to do it. And so we created this small business advisors platform as a way for these small mom and pop shops to go and get that hand holding and get that assistance in setting up their profile. It's not just GBP, it's expanded to ads and YouTube and there's other channels there. But this was the first foray into paid support. My guess is that now that program has been very successful, right? And the goal and the price tag associated to it was to not make money. It was just to break even. It was to pay for itself, right? And the idea was, if we could have this be self-funded, then we can scale it up, and it's going to be cost neutral to Google. So that's kind of where I think the philosophy of paid support is moving in that direction, where we do have the capability. I know that the advertising team, like Google Ads, is looking into a paid model, but I don't really know where it is.
Okay, so what many of the commenters have said in the chat is that this is U.S. only. It's not available outside the U.S. Are there options for people outside the U.S.?
Yeah, in fact,
and we're really sort of at the end of the hour. We can keep going for a little while to get to some of these additional questions, but just let's be mindful of the time.
Sure. All right. Well, let me just say this then on the small business advisors, is that we started the program as a pilot. We are staffing it in English only as a language. And so we started it in the US as a preliminary, there you go, I got it out, preliminary test. The expansion of that program was likely going to go to other English-speaking countries first so that we could use the same resources. So Canada, the UK, Australia, things like that. At the time, I wasn't aware of expanding that to include other languages, but there was at least a plan at the time to expand to other English-speaking countries.
Okay, great. Quick question on why did Google eliminate the Google Trusted Photographer program?
Well, I don't know, actually. I guess people weren't using it. That kind of seems like a reason why Google turned stuff off, is that statistically it just wasn't performing as well as they would want. So, but that's an educated guess because I wasn't part of that program.
Okay, David, you had a question about AI operators.
Maybe we'll have a grab back for a future podcast. Yeah, just I don't want to get into it, but I feel like the potential for abuse with AI operators is something that maybe Google is considering, but I can't imagine they have a solution in place given their lack of effectiveness against human spammers at the moment.
How are you defining AI operators? What is
like OpenAI?
Like what OpenAI released last week, yeah, where you can have a program that does a bunch of stuff for you, sort of running in the background.
Interesting. Yeah.
Clicks, makes purchases, searches. I mean, it can click on stuff.
Yeah.
I feel like we're about to see a massive influx of level 10 local guides.
Well, I mean, look, my response to that would be, you probably all saw in the algorithm update last year, right? Like in the March update last year, where I was actually I'm preparing for another speaking engagement. And I ran some statistics, and one of the statistics was that in 2014, or between Q1 of 2013 and Q1 of 2014, AI generated content, right? Like blogs, webinars, web pages, grew over 2,800%. So basically, the corpus of information on the internet is growing at a more than usual event as a result of the introduction of AI. And now, because every marketing company has the ability to just load in a prompt into AI, create data and content, and drop it on the website, right? So in the early days, that may have worked. But what happens when it gets abused is Google takes notice of that, right? And then they release the update that they did in March of last year saying that we're changing our algorithm to get rid of AI generated spam. And they didn't say AI generated spam. They said unoriginal and unhelpful content, I think was the exact wording. And so if you parlay that philosophy to what you just said, David, I think that it might work temporarily, but Google's going to catch on and they're going to figure out a way to clear it out because it's just going to dilute legitimate experiences. And so there really isn't any replacement for honest human content and human interactions. And Google will invest in trying to weed out the crap and present the signal and eliminate the noise. I know that it's getting harder and harder to do that, but Google's investing in their own AI algorithms and they've got their own large language models. So their ability to detect AI content is actually getting better. So my advice there is that it'll probably be a short-lived investment before it gets addressed.
David, the next ranking signal will be a paywall.
Yes. So
on that note, please sign up for the Near Media
right, exactly.
product plan.
That's right.
Like a paywall is actually a pretty effective way to eliminate bad actors, But anyway.
Yeah. So couple final questions before we let you go, Brad. Thank you very, very much for your generosity and all your time today. Question about trust score of a profile. This is a two-part question. Does removing a user and adding a new user email reduce the trust score of a profile? That's the first question. The second question is, does changing profile users or ownership get flagged as spam by Google?
So this is another one where I don't know definitively. I'll give you my opinion, which is no. I don't think it does. Like adding a brand new Google account to a listing doesn't necessarily impact the authority of the listing. I think that if you're using that brand new guy to do something like verification, then yeah, it's going to be harder to get that through the verification check. But like the actual authority of the listing itself won't be impacted. It's the authority of the user that is going to be the problem.
Although we have seen bad actors who are associated with an account causing soft suspensions. So there is a relationship.
Yeah.
If the email is associated with a bad actor.
Yes, and well, I think the key is in the soft suspension philosophy there, because the idea of a soft suspension is that it's still on the map, so we're not kind of like penalizing you as a business. People can still find you and still interact with your listing. It's just we don't trust the edit that person made. So we need you to kind of like go through and elevate that level of trust before we make that change publicly. So I would be shocked if I ever saw a hard suspension come out of that where it actually pulls the listing off the internet.
So corollary to that, though, is a business better off using a domain related to their website email
absolutely.
address than?
Oh, that's a big yes. So like if you are managing your profile from the domain that is also linked as the web domain on that profile, it's increasing in authority already, as opposed to managing it by a dedicated Gmail account. That's just, if you have the ability to manage it with a corporate domain, absolutely do that 100% of the time. And your other question, sorry, go ahead, Greg.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, your other question was, well, what happens if you change like the primary owner, right? I think that at least that's how I identify
yes.
it.
Yes.
Again, I would say that change in and of itself probably won't impact the authority of the listing itself. But what that person does with it might, right? So like if that person then goes in, it's the new primary owner, starts messing with a bunch of stuff, then it might be like, all right, hang on a second, there's a new guy here in town. I don't know who you are. And you're starting to make all these changes. So it might actually push it into re-verification or a soft suspension. But I don't think the act of making the change does anything. It's what they do with it that'll be the factor.
Claudia, did you want to add something? You're making notes in the margin here. You mute. You're on mute, Claudia. You're on mute. Claudia, you're on mute.
We can't hear you, Claudia. I don't know definitively, but I would say yes, because you're now working on behalf of an association, an agency, or an organizational group. And so my guess is that there's more authority coming through a company than there is coming through an individual. So it's an educated guess, but I would argue yes. And generally speaking, I think that's kind of best practice, right? Like just to have your agency set up as an org account, get access to the listing via a location group or the org account, depending on how you want to set it up, and then manage through user access to those accounts. That would be best practice.
Okay, everybody. Thank you so much for your participation, all your questions. Brad, thanks for your time. We'd love to have you back and do another one of these at some point in the future.
Greg, I had just one question, if you allow.
Go ahead.
Yeah, right. So when there's
when we are
managing when we are managing in groups. So I used to manage it in email. In 2021, my account got restricted and hundreds of profile got suspended. Then I thought that managing it in agency dashboard would be good. So this, I think 2024, when the locksmith had that problem again, my all the almost 60-70 this businesses were suspended in that agency dashboard. I thought that at least agency dashboard won't get account restricted. So there was nothing, but maybe some spammy locksmith I got account and then it got restricted.
Yeah, so that does sound accurate, where if Google detected a lot of spammy behavior coming from an account, like an agency account. And I think at the time they put certain thresholds in place to check. So if you had more than 10% of your listings in a suspended state, or if it triggered into suspended as a result, like you loaded it up and then all of a sudden it triggered suspension, as opposed to adding it as a suspended case, right? Then that would be a signal on the agency level, right? To be like, hey, maybe this is just a bad agency, right? And especially agencies that are leveraging an API have the ability to do a tremendous amount of damage, right? Because they can edit a lot of things in bulk. So yeah, that does sound like it's possible. My guess, since the end of the Nescafe program, of the, what did we call it externally, the Trusted Verifier program or something like that, the risk of that is a lot lower because we're not giving people to automatically verify. But I think the spammy behavior is still something at an agency level. Is still something that'll be monitored and dealt with if we suspect that there's an agent that's just doing bad things. So don't do bad things and you'll be fine.
Okay, David.
Good advice. Brad, thanks so much for joining us today. Where should people contact you if they didn't get a chance to ask their question in this forum, or if they want to hire you for future guidance? Where should they go?
Yeah, no, absolutely. In fact, I'm excited to announce that I actually just accepted a role as the COO of a company called Esquire Digital. This is the new company there. It's an agency that does primarily law firms, but I'm actually planning on folding in my Bitwise consulting business under that umbrella. So you can still contact me at brad@bitwiseconsulting.com, or if you just go to bitwiseconsulting.com, you'll see more information about me and my services on that site. But just stay tuned, because there may be a branding change in the near future as I transition over to work under the Esquire umbrella. But thank you much for having me. I love hearing it. There was actually a comment in the live stream, which is, I love the game that we're playing, which is Let's Try and Stump Brad. I thought that was pretty comical, and I love it. Like, let's do it again and see if you can throw something at me that I don't know.
Great. Well, we're really grateful for all your time today. To those of you who are joining, again, as free subscribers, this was a unique office hours in terms of being open to non-paying members. So if you enjoyed today's content, we hope you'll consider subscribing at the $20 a month rate to our all access plan. I will be hosting next month's office hours and presenting a brief deck of some of our user research in a number of different categories: hotels, restaurants, and home services, especially, as well as legal, healthcare, and storage. So if you're interested in learning how users are interacting with Google search results in any of those industries, hope you'll sign up for our paid product and join us for next month's office hours, which will be the same time and same place here on Riverside, the second Friday in March.